Dr. Barbara.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Black Health Trust weekly program. We are so pleased you've chosen to empower yourselves today by joining us. It's great to have our regular attendees back and those new to the program. My name is Barbara Stevens, and I am your hostess and co-moderator for today, along with my two trusted colleagues, Dr. Randall Maxey and Dr. Ivan Davis. I hope you are all doing well and enjoying a wonderful day. Today, our discussion will center on Black Health Trust, a year in review, and current concerns. We are going to have a question and answer program this afternoon, led by Drs. Maxey, Dr. Walk, and myself. For those of you who are new to our program, let me share with you the mission statement of Black Health Trust. Black Health Trust was founded in response to the coronavirus global pandemic and Dr. Randall Maxey's personal desire to keep his own family safe, and fortunate for us, his commitment to informing his tribe evolved into a much larger vision. The purpose and mission of Black Health Trust is to provide credible insights from our community health experts to best serve our communities of color with a coalition of leading and long-standing Black medical professionals across a diverse spectrum of disciplines to offer their expertise and insights into our physical and mental health during these challenging times. These opinions offered are to help educate and inspire you to take your health seriously and to ask questions of your own medical providers. Now, I will share a few housekeeping items and announcements for the program. This video conference is a live program and is being recorded on different program platforms like Facebook Live and YouTube. Your participation on this program is completely voluntary, and if you choose to participate and not prefer to have your image and likeness displayed, there are visual and audio settings on your personal device that you can use, which can block your picture and mute your voice. That said, all participants will be muted by our Zoom technician initially. We ask that you remain muted until the host or moderator asks you to contribute in order to minimize the distraction of background noise so we can give 100% attention to our speakers. Check and make sure your device is on mute until called on to speak, and then once again, place your device back on mute when you are done speaking. With regards to the chat room, if you have questions, please enter them into the chat room. But we ask that you limit your questions to just 2 per topic being addressed. And please do not use this forum to advertise or promote your products. Understand that there may not be sufficient time to get all the questions answered during the call, but we will do our best. As far as chat etiquette is concerned, when you have your 2 questions in and we have addressed them, then please feel free to enter additional questions on a new topic. Now, we need to give a formal disclaimer. Please note that the information communicated on this program is not intended or deemed to be medical or legal advice, and you should always consult your own medical or legal professional for advice and direction pertaining to your particular situation and needs. The information presented here is not advice, but rather opinions and recommendations from credible sources. Black Health Trust, its representatives, members, employees, attendees, heirs, assigns, and guest speakers and presenters assume no liability whatsoever in connection with the information presented or used by anyone, nor are their discussions directed to specific situations. Again, we strongly encourage all attendees of the program to consult their own legal or medical professional for conclusive guidance on how to proceed in your own personal circumstances. We're in this together. If this program has been valuable and interesting to you, please visit the website to learn more about our programming and how you can support Black Health Trust so we can continue bringing our community outstanding content. Please visit blackhealthtrust.org. If you send an email to social@blackhealthtrust.org, please include your first and last name so that you may be added to the Black Health Trust mailing list. If you don't want to be included in the mailing list, please just indicate this in your email. We want to thank the Black Health Trust Steering Committee, Executive Board, Virtual Administrative Assistant, our media production and Zoom technician, our Black Health Trust supporters, and all the people behind the scenes for their time and efforts that make this program possible. Now, let us settle back and settle in and begin our day's program. I will turn this over now to Dr. Maxey.
Good afternoon, Dr. Neighbors. Good afternoon to Dr. Walks and all of our distinguished visitors, and you are, and attendees. Happy Resurrection Day. And this program is going to be a bit atypical in that we want to recognize much of the progress that we as a group have been able to make over the past year, that our country, our world has been made over the past year. But I want to take a point of personal privilege to begin the program. So I'm a scientist, I'm a physician, fairly well studied, but at an early age, I was introduced to the life of spirit and of God, and I would be less than genuine if I didn't express that on a day as momentous as today. Someone asked me a week ago to give the medical definitions and explanation of how Christ died on the cross. And so I read some books and listed, and finally I came to the conclusion that, hey, I can't really explain that in medical or pathological terms. Let's just say it was supernatural. And I've studied anatomy and physiology, pathophysiology, and medicine for the past more than 50 years. It is so clear to me how great God is. So I've asked a special friend of mine, a person that I consider a teacher and a mentor to me. We know each other well enough that we can have fun, but he's a very serious gentleman. He has a master's in Hebrew and Greek. He has his doctorate. He's been a pastor in the AME church for years and is now, he told me he retired, but I don't believe him. But I'd like him to have a few words at the top of our program on this Resurrection Day, because it is the Spirit of God that brought us not only out of Egypt, but brought us across the oceans to this country that was built by our labor and our back. I'd like to introduce Pastor Sabine Jones from Atlanta, Georgia, to start our program. Dr. Jones?
Today, everybody, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, praise the Lord. To Dr. Max and all of the members of the Black Health Trust and members and friends, it's a pleasure to be with you today and to celebrate with you something that a lot of folk don't celebrate. That is the resurrection season. And it's because that there has been a misnomer placed into history of the development and growth of the church, something called Easter, which had nothing to do with anything, nothing to do with nothing. The resurrection season is a very important season, and we almost go by it without really realizing what actually happened. That is very, very, very important to the body of Christ, in particular to the growth of the earth. So many times people do misunderstand completely the 37th chapter of Ezekiel, because it is talking about a resurrection in mass, in mass. It talks about beginning in a valley of dry bones and everything being reconstituted in terms of sinews and skin and all that, which are ligaments and tendons, et cetera, and muscles, and covering over with flesh. Then they're standing there, reconstituted, reassembled, standing in formation. And then all of a sudden, the wind blows, there's a rumbling in the valley, and he breathes air into them, life into them, and they become alive. And then it's declared that this is the whole nation of Israel, both the southern tribe and the northern tribe, under one king, that is David, you know. And then something very interesting happens. 1 Peter chapter 3, around verse 16 says that the Lord preaches to the spirits in prison. He speaks to those that are in prison to stay for eternity, but he also speaks to those who are in a place called the bosom of Abraham, and they hear the message, the gospel message, and get up. And in the 27th chapter of Matthew, they appear in Israel and Jerusalem in the aftermath of the resurrection of Jesus. So that the resurrector brings forth the en masse resurrection in his aftermath, comes back to the earth, displays himself, and those with him display themselves to those that are available. They have kept their promise to Joseph to bring his bones out of Egypt, because the resurrection is not going to take place in Egypt, but in Israel. And then that same day that Jesus resurrects, he comes back, he tells Mary not to tell him he hadn't been offered up yet, and he goes to heaven, and he takes all of the resurrected saints of the Old Testament with him and presents him to his Father in heaven, along with the blood that he had shed on the cross. That same day he returns, and in the upper room in the afternoon, he steps into the midst of all those 120 in the upper room and breathes breath into them in the same way that he breathed breath into those that were in the paradise of hell. Now he's breathing breath into the church upon the earth. Then what does he do? He goes and he registers all of those that he's taken out of hell. And in the 12th chapter of Hebrews, verse 22 to 24, it talks about the church of the firstborn that are wretches are written off in heaven. There's another section called those who die in the Lord in the New Testament on the resurrection side of the cross, who are justified spirits made perfect, waiting for the next resurrection. And so the resurrection season is, number one, placing the Old Testament saints in heaven, and number two, establishing the church on earth. Establishing the church on earth, and it had 50 days to wait for the coming of the empowering of the church, which is the day of Pentecost. And so here we are celebrating the resurrection of the Lord Jesus Christ, the resurrector of the in mass resurrection. And as those who had to pay, received the payoff for the Old Testament out of the promise of Abraham in the 12th, 15th, and 17th chapter of Genesis, we now are waiting for our resurrection when Jesus comes back again. As it says in the 24th Psalm, lift up your heads, O ye gates, be ye uplifted door, and the King of glory shall come in. Who is this King of glory? The Lord strong and mighty, the Lord mighty in battle. So the resurrection is not just about the resurrector, but also the in mass resurrection of all those who trust and believe that he is the one that the Lord sent, and he is the propitiation of sin that allows us access to become a part of the family of God, as we are identified in chapter 12 of Hebrews 22-24 as a part of the great crowd of witnesses. Now we have arrived, and we remember that resurrection now, in Jesus' name. And so to close this out, I'd just like to share a song with you that I have been working on. My wife's going to do the preaching this morning, so I'm going to be the person doing the singing. This is the song that I want to share with you. Can you hear that?
Yes.
Yes.
Anointing fall on me. Anointing fall on me. Let the power of the Holy Ghost fall on me. Anointing fall on me. Anointing fall on me. Anointing fall on me. Let the power of the Holy Ghost fall on me. Anointing fall on me. Anointing, anointing fall on me. Anointing fall on me. Let the power of the Holy Ghost fall on me. Anointing fall on me. Anointing.
Don't laugh at that old man.
Fall on me. Anointing. Let the power of the Holy Ghost fall on me. Anointing fall on me. Oh, anointing fall on me. Anointing fall on me. Let the power of the Holy Ghost fall on me. Anointing fall on me. Fall on me, anointing. Fall on me. Let the power of the Holy Ghost fall on me. Let the power of the Holy Ghost fall on me. Let the power of the Holy Ghost fall on me. Anointing fall on me. Anointing fall, fall. Anointing fall on me. Anointing fall on me.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Pastor. We want to go through our, thank you, Pastor. We want to go through our program and hear our statistics.
Yes,
I'm very grateful to be here today. I have my sight, and I know why I have my sight. I was missing for a few weeks, and now I can see. But let's go through our statistics. Dr. Barbara?
All right. As those of you who are regulars know, we use the data provided by CDC on their COVID-19 tracker. This information is updated by 8 o'clock the day before. So this data will be from yesterday. So as of yesterday, there were reported 30,492,334 cases of COVID. A daily count for yesterday was 67,000. I'm sorry, the total daily across the country was 67,989. The total US deaths was 553,681, with the daily total of deaths for yesterday reported at 789. The total number of vaccine doses administered as of yesterday, this is a combination of first and completed, if it's a 2-dose regimen, was 165 million. Our next slide will highlight the demographics of the vaccine administered. I was blocked on my own screen. I want to call your attention to the fact that of the doses administered where race and ethnicity data is available, 8.3% are attributed to Black non-Hispanic, which is a tiny little tick up from last week, but we're making progress. That does it for the data.
Thank you, Dr. Barbara. Well, again, so far there are nearly 154 million doses of COVID vaccine have been administered in the United States, with over 56 million people that have been fully vaccinated, which is progress, as you say. We do know that we have 3 vaccines that have received emergency use authorization. That means they can be given under government auspices, but they can't yet be sold commercially. And there are another few vaccines that are currently in the works. Right now, we know we have Pfizer, we have Moderna, and we have J&J. And there are some others on the way. We know that a new CDC study shows that COVID-19 vaccines are effective at prevention of COVID infection in serious COVID illnesses. But I heard an interesting metaphor today that if you have a fireproof suit that's 95% effective or efficacious, you don't necessarily want to go and jump in the middle of a fire. So even though the CDC says you can travel more safely if you've had a vaccine, it's still like you're wearing a fireproof suit that's 95% fireproof. There's still a 5% chance that you can get burned. So if it's worth it for you to take that 5% chance, then do what you think you got to do. But there's still a significant risk that you can, one, be infected, and two, transmit, even though it's been shown that there's less transmission. We also know that 80% of the world's vaccines have been used by 30% of the countries in the world, including ours. What does this do? This means that even though we're making our people safer, this allows in some of the underdeveloped, unvaccinated countries to develop more variants. So it's like having a housekeeper in your home that's untreated, unvaccinated, and your family is vaccinated, but she's fixing your food and intermingling with your family. So we've got to look at this more than just nationalistically at the United States of America, but in fact, we have to discuss how we can get these vaccines and treatments to the rest of the world, because we do live on this earth with other people. And to the extent that they're not doing well or they're infected, we still are in a Category 5 hurricane that will still come our way, protected or not, and will come our way with variants and mutations that are currently there. So it is very important that we take a world view and not just a narrow view. We also know that there's the issue of the unknown. The word novel means new. And despite all of our MDs and PhDs and master's degrees, we still don't know much about this virus. We don't know how long this vaccine is going to work. Is it going to require a booster? Are we going to have to get vaccinated every season coming up? So there's a lot that we have to learn about that. And we also know that we're talking about medical treatments, pharmacologic treatments, but are these even the best treatments? I was in a discussion recently that discussed, are injectable vaccines the best way to provide immunity for a disease that predominantly affects the lungs? Or should the vaccine really be a nebulization that you inhale? And that gave me pause for thought. And are medications the real best way to do it? Or are there treatments that have nothing to do with medication that we should be considering and doing? So there's a lot of questions that we have. So what we want to do, I'm going to ask Dr. Barber to introduce in detail Dr. Walks. I'm going to ask him to introduce in detail Dr. Barber. And we have some of our medical advisory group, and we want to have a discussion of what we've done over the past year and the questions that are asked and still asked. We've had individuals, for example, that have been on this call for the past year, and yet and still are still not convinced that they should be taking the vaccine to protect their families and themselves. So we need to discuss some of that and get down to the business of saving our communities. Dr. Barber, would you introduce in detail our Associate Dr. Walks, who's head of our vaccine Advocacy Committee, and I'd like him to introduce you, and then let's get started with our discussion.
Absolutely. But before I have the pleasure of introducing more formally Dr. Walks, there's another slide that I need to share before we launch off. Simon, can we have the last slides? So I wanted to share this information with our audience in case they hadn't heard. For those who have completed their vaccinations or will be completing their vaccinations, you are able to get your vaccine card laminated for free at either Office Depot, Office Max, or Staples. You will need to use a coupon code that's on this slide, and we will put the coupon codes in the chat as well. So this is the information about Office Depot and Office Max. Next slide, please. This is the information about Staples. Now, Office Max and Office Depot are saying right now that this offer is available until July 25th. Staples initially said it would be available just till May 1st, then they said April. And now they're saying it's going to be available for an undetermined amount of time. So just keep those timelines in mind. Thank you. And now it is my pleasure to present to those who know you and introduce to those who don't, Dr. Ivan Walks. Dr. Ivan Walks is a clinician with a varied career, like many of us. He has served as the Chief Medical Officer for the District of Columbia, as well as serving as advisor to presidents, and is a psychiatrist by training, and currently is founder and CEO of Ivan Walks and Associates, a healthcare consultancy firm. So without further ado, Dr. Walks.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Dr. Neighbor-Stevens. Thank you for your gracious introduction. I certainly appreciate it. And before we move too far past it, I put in the chat a reference to a movie called The Case for Christ. A lot of times we struggle with the science behind the resurrection, the crucifixion and the resurrection. And I've shown this movie a couple of times with my men's group at church, and it really does clarify a lot of the science that supports a better understanding of the crucifixion and the resurrection. It's a 2017 movie, and I would just recommend it to anyone who, like me, tries to reconcile my science and my faith. It did a good job of doing that for me. So on to Dr. Neighbor-Stevens. Dr. Neighbor-Stevens, graduate of Harvard University and Tufts Medical School. And after a completion of a pediatric residency, she served 2 years in the National Health Service Corps. She served as assistant medical director for the Tennessee Bureau of Medicaid before assuming the role director of pediatric education at Meharry Medical College. Dr. Neighbor-Stevens is a well-practiced clinician, a well-respected and well-practiced administrator, serving in leadership roles across the country. And in fact, recently had to miss one of the Black Health Trust meetings because she was doing her work with the National Medical Association. So someone with a true servant's heart that we are graced with on these Sunday afternoon calls. We love you. We thank you so much for all the work that you do for us here and everywhere else. Dr. Barbara Neighbor-Stevens.
Very, very good. I want to start off the discussion, maybe not in chronological order. And I note that a number of our distinguished medical advisors are on, so be prepared to jump in with comments as is appropriate. we do see you on the line. And but there is the incident that I've had occasion to see in the past several weeks, uh, what's called a long haul syndrome, also known as post-sequela events, post-sequela events. That is people who have had COVID and recovered somewhat, but not fully recovered. They still have the mental fog. They still have the disabilities. Many are hypercoagulable and have TIAs or strokes. Many have continuing nephritis or problems with their kidneys. Some have myocarditis or an inflammation of the heart muscle. And some have described something that has been identified as a cerebritis. And so even some who have not had severe COVID in terms of being admitted to a hospital or having been intubated, there continue to be those that have long-term effects. This has even been reported in children and in youngsters, and it is a concern. And a lot of people have the mindset that if they have a mild case of COVID and get over it, they're okay. And I submit that there's a lot that we don't know. And I'd like to start out with just a brief discussion of this area that's been known as the long haul syndrome. And I know we have a neurosurgeon on, Dr. Gary Dennis. We have some psychiatrists on and emergency room physicians. So I'm going to open the floor and ask maybe Dr. Walks to start, and then Dr. Stevens and Dr. Dennis and Dr. Clark.
Thank you, Dr. Maxey. This is really a very important issue. I was talking with someone yesterday who told me that they were going to get the vaccine, but they were really concerned about the possible side effects. And I said, have you thought about the side effects of COVID-19? Have you had that conversation before you start talking about side effects of vaccine? It is real. And Dr. Maxey, you mentioned a lot of the physical health impacts of COVID-19 over a long period of time. I know that our friend, Dr. Ron Bailey is on, who's also a psychiatrist. The long-term mental health impacts of COVID-19 are just huge. We're looking at folks struggling to cope not only with loss of loved ones as a mental health long-term effect, but folks struggling with the impacts of COVID-19 on them. A lot of seniors who maybe, as the pastor would say in church, I know y'all don't like the meet and greet, but for some of you, it's the only hug you get all week. Well, we've seen that to be the case, as a lot of churches have been unavailable for folks over the course of many, many, many months. And a lot of seniors have declined in terms of their cognitive function over that period of time. We've seen people who have struggled with chronic mental illness, depression, other sorts of mental health challenges have gotten worse. People that haven't had mental health challenges have developed mental health challenges. People that have substance use disorders have had significant challenges. And there's a lot of science behind all of this that I'm talking about. When we look at the opioid death rates across the country, people have lost their normal AA meetings and their normal NA meetings that are a very important external structure for them. And without the ability to self-structure, these folks have had relapses and have had some really bad outcomes. So thank you for the opportunity to really highlight some of the mental health consequences of COVID-19 over the last year. And as people are beginning to carefully come out of some of the restrictions as they are able to travel a little bit more when they're fully vaccinated, at least 2 weeks post the full vaccination, but still continuing to wear masks and keep distance and wash hands and all of those things. We're beginning to return to some of the levels of human interaction that are just critical for good mental health. Really hard to be a healthy person locked up in a place by yourself for a long period of time. So yes, we're heading towards the light at the end of the tunnel, but we're not there yet. And as we look at the mental health consequences and the physical health consequences, we've had some really challenging things happen.
Let's stay on the mental health for a minute before we go to the neurologic and neurosurgical implications. I see at least 2 other psychiatric doctors on the phone. I see Dr. Michelle Clark from the Oakland, San Francisco issue, who did her MD at Columbia University and also trained at Harlem Hospital. Is Dr. Clark, would you comment on some of this?
Thank you very much, Dr. Maxey, and I certainly echo what was said. I'm continually frustrated by the naysayers around the issue of accepting the vaccine and protecting themselves and others. And it's aside from that, vaccinated or not, the level of anxiety, even more so than depression, but the level of anxiety has been tremendous. The amount of sleeplessness, so many with sleep disorders who are struggling with that for the first time. And as you know, sleep is the basis for your body's healing process. That's when you rest and allow the mind and the tissues to regenerate. I can think of no better time than Resurrection Sunday to talk about people rethinking how to conduct themselves in this new reality that we're going to have. Because clearly these challenges are not going away. This virus is going to mutate, other viruses are going to manifest, and we have to be prepared. And we have to be the example for others. And I think the only way thus far that I've been successful with my loved ones, with my extended family, with my patients, is to be the example, to constantly explain the vaccine, to demonstrate my faith, and to demonstrate my health. I think that is the most important thing that we can do. And I want to say that this gathering, this Black Health Trust, has been so helpful in supporting me in my efforts to work with my patients, my friends, my family, my community, and giving me accurate information to provide for them, to counteract the myths. Some of these myths and ideas are absolutely fantastic. I mean, it's like they came out of a sci-fi movie. Unbelievable thoughts about what the vaccine might do. I don't want them injecting germs into me. It's just insane. So anyway, thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts and to support this program's effort. I really good to see everybody looking well. Hey, Wilbur. Hey, Jesse, Barbara. Hey, Ivan. Gary, Dennis. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, we're going to come to Dr. Dennis in a moment. I'm going to go to Dr. Ron Bailey, noted psychiatrist, assistant dean at Drew University, medical director of Kedron, and soon to be the first chief of psychiatry that's African American. at Louisiana State University in New Orleans, Dr. Ron Bailey. Would you comment on the long haul psychiatric effects?
Where is Ron?
Do you see Dr. Bailey, Dr.
I saw Ron earlier. He was on.
I don't.
Okay. In the meantime, let's go to Dr. Gary Dennis, who is neurosurgeon, who is chief of neurosurgery. Listen, I don't understand this. How were you chief of neurosurgery at Howard University in your third decade of life and has subsequently been a well-known, nationally recognized neurosurgeon? But this is one of the smartest brothers I know and has been a mentor to me in the National Medical Association. Dr. Gary Dennis, would you care to comment?
Hold on, Dr. Maxey. While Dr. Dennis is being unmuted, Dr. Dennis is not only one of the smartest people ever, he's one of the nicest and most giving people ever. When I first got to Washington, D.C., Dr. Dennis embraced me, introduced me, and took care of me. And it's important to recognize when people look out for you before they get to know you. Dr. Dennis is one of those people. So thank you, man. Love you.
But I just don't know how you get to be a neurosurgeon, which takes 12 years itself, and you're just barely 30 years old. I want an explanation of that.
Well, I didn't become a chief of neurosurgery until 2 years later. I was 32. So it was a wonderful experience. But, you know, I'm no longer the chief of neurosurgery at Howard University. I retired, took an early retirement, and had been working in a number of different institutions in Louisiana and in the Dallas, Texas area. But very recently, I returned to DC because it's my home, and I intend to help in any way I can. Now, what I would say is that long haul syndrome, which is what has been referred to, is something that requires some more in-depth observation from a scientific point of view. You see how it is affecting people, and both the psychiatric and neurological, as well as in pulmonary and other systems, which have yet to be described. But what has happened is a syndrome associated with fatigue, chronic executive management skills deterioration, as well as just what we call brain fog, is now what I would say requires some definitive research. And so when I came back to Washington, I joined a research institute in DC. It's called the Emerson Clinical Research Institute. And we've been doing research on not only COVID, but also other pharmacological agents to see their impact on patients who are chronically ill. What we need, though, is to kind of separate very clearly from this Black Health Trust the difference between a reaction to a vaccine and a reaction to a disease. And from what we can tell, a lot of the complications of this illness, this COVID illness, are coming from the virus itself and its various mutations. And we're going to have to get the whole country vaccinated. They may need several different boosters to knock out the mutants. And with that, I think we'll begin to turn the corner more rapidly. But right now, we still need to look more into what the long haul syndrome is doing to our communities, but we also have to also look at ways to improve healthcare delivery as well as in further investigation. Unfortunately, there are very few African Americans and minorities involved in research that can help give us some of those answers. And that's what I and Dr. Walter Faggett have been doing in Washington, both with COVID as well as other pharmacologic agents needed for treatment of chronic pain as it relates to these diseases. So what I would say is, number one, Dr. Maxey has always been a great thinker. And he again has thought about this resource. We need to begin also to think more seriously about how the entity like this can develop and continue to grow and bring new research opportunities, not only to the members and the associates of this trust, but in the United States. This is a time when we could step up. Opportunity is there, and began to have a serious look at research that may affect us very definitely and needs to be managed.
Thank you so much. Now, we've talked about long haul syndrome, mainly in adults, but I noticed at least 3 pediatrically trained physicians on the call. I want to talk about the effect of the virus in general, and in particular the long haul syndrome, and recent evidence that the variants are having a more infective and aggressive effect on young children than we thought. And especially it was thought some months ago that children going back to school were not as affected, but I understand that this B117 or the UK variant is affecting children in this current rise in infections. And I want to know if Dr. Barbara Neighbor-Stevens, Dr. Jesse Sherrod, and I saw another pediatric doctor on the phone would address this somewhat. Dr. Neighbor-Stevens?
Thank you. You know, we keep coming back to this theme in our comments, and it's not a cop-out, it's the truth. We are still very much on the left side of a learning curve regarding this disease. And we made some assumptions in some instances, and we may have made some premature conclusions based on early findings. This whole, I won't say myth, but the thought that children were not infected or were not affected by COVID was primarily the result of the observation early in the course of the pandemic, when children were, we went into our stay in place mode. And so children weren't out and about intermingling as much. And so, and combined with the fact that when children in general are infected, they tend to be asymptomatic or have very mild symptoms, so you would not know necessarily that they were infected. And thirdly, children were not tested very much during the first year of the pandemic. So the actual occurrence rate of COVID-19 infection in the pediatric population was probably underestimated because of all of those factors, and perhaps some assumptions were made that are now turning out to be not as true as we thought. we did recognize fairly early in the past year of the pandemic, that there was this phenomenon of delayed onset of multi-system inflammatory disease in kids triggered by COVID. And once the red flag was raised, I think people became more sensitive and quicker to identify the occurrence of that complication. But that still does not represent a huge incidence in the course of pediatric infection. But my suspicion is that as the number of cases of COVID are truly identified and children are monitored more closely, as has been proposed to be the part of the protocol when schools are reopened, that some of those initial thoughts about COVID-19 in kids is going to be amended. But I'd be interested to hear what my pediatric colleagues think.
Dr. Sharon? I like that hat.
Absolutely.
Can we make sure Dr. Sharon is able to unmute?
Hello? Yeah,
Hello,
thank,
Dr. Sharon, we can hear you.
thank you and happy Easter to everybody.
I
And
like that Easter bonnet you have.
oh, thank you so much, Dr. Maxey. You know, I'm just trying to represent the ancestors. You know, we all wear hats on Easter Sunday. I've been listening to all of the remarks and I agree completely with Dr. Barbara Neighbor-Stevens. You know, the primary manifestation of COVID in kids, one of the major primary manifestations is the Kawasaki syndrome. And it's a multi-inflammatory syndrome that affects the whole body, just as it does in adults. Now, I think we won't know very much about long haulers in children until we get them back in school. You know, they've been out of school. And so the kids that have been infected, I think we'll find out more when they go back to school as to how they are performing, because kids may not be able to verbalize to you that they are having brain fog, that they are having difficulties speaking or writing or whatever. But I wanted to go back to some comments that Dr. Dennis made, and I actually had a question for him because the long hauler syndrome is very similar to what we call myalgia encephalomyelitis or chronic fatigue syndrome, which is a post-viral syndrome. And so the long hauler syndrome is the post-viral COVID syndrome. And I was just wondering if he had any new information on how that compares with COVID long haulers. How does chronic fatigue syndrome and myalgia encephalomyelitis, which they call it in England, compare to that? But also, I have to point out, and Dr. Maxey understands that I have been very frustrated about the lack of a comprehensive, multi-pronged approach to this pandemic, which I think includes not only the vaccine, but early treatment. There has been less focus on early treatment and prevention. I mean, we have the preventive health, public health measures like, you know, wearing the mask and washing your hands and the social distancing. But we also need to emphasize just as much, I think, early treatment, actually prevention first, is that is you got to eat right and you got to get your immune system strong, because there are three major factors that determine whether you get the infection. The major factor is the status of your immune system. And then the exposure, the length of exposure to the virus, and the virulence of the organism. We know the organism is very virulent. Now, early treatment, I think, and it's been shown, there's a study out of New York with Dr. Zelensko studying 3,000 patients that were treated early once they got COVID, and none of his patients have gone on to long haulers. So I think that early treatment is a major factor in whether you develop long haulers or not. Then the other thing I'd like to say is that there's data documented and published in the Journal of Immunology that the COVID-19 virus interacts with every organ in the body. So the brain, the kidneys, the lungs, every organ cross reacts with that, as well as the vaccine. The vaccine also cross react with every organ system, and that's been documented. Now, what does that mean? The implications of that long term, we don't really know. And that's something, we know that we are evolving our information as this pandemic evolves. So I would like to emphasize people, only a third of the population right now is vaccinated. We have to continue to push people to get vaccinated, but we also have to push early treatment. And I think that actually will help us unload the burden on the healthcare system, because we need to decrease that pipeline into the hospital, and especially in low-income neighborhoods. They could be tested and prophylactic, the families, because they don't have the ability to isolate. And so one person in the family gets infected, then the whole family is infected. So if we catch them at the time that they're positive and prophylact the whole family, we can decrease the number of people going into the hospital, because our healthcare workers are burning out. And if we have the fourth surge, I'm very nervous about this fourth surge, because right now we have healthcare workers who are not only experiencing mental health problems, but they are physically burnt out.
But let me ask this question of your other colleague is here. I want him to comment on that, Dr. Wilbur Jordan, who's
Yes.
also infectious disease, as are you, Dr. Sherrod. Dr. Jordan, we know we're headed towards this new surge. Are you seeing this in your practice, and like your comments on this? And
Well,
then Dr. Barbara is going to go to the chat box.
We are seeing at OASIS an increase in the number of people who are coming in complaining of problems that when we test them, they are positive. But I think I told you once before, we tested all of our patients early on, and we found that 13% of the patients had antibodies to COVID, though only 4 had been symptomatic. So they were all surprised, etc. One of the things that we have not done, and I mean the whole group, and it goes right to what Jesse was saying, we've never taken the gamma globulin, the antibodies, from people who have had it and giving it that much. That's what our president got, our former president got. We need to look at things that we can treat some people earlier, so we don't have so many people going into the hospital.
Right.
The other thing I think that we need to do is we need to have a better network. The majority of Blacks who come into the urgent care or emergency room at the MLK area or at St. Francis don't have a private doctor.
Right.
So we still need to deal with that issue. Going into an ICU or going into an emergency room is not the place I need to be going for the first time with COVID. And I was in Arkansas recently and talking to people, why don't you have a doctor? I think that's something we need to take to the NMA and get it to do. Too many of us do not have a doctor. And we can talk about the problems in Africa and in Haiti, etc. There's no reason that exists here. We can solve that problem here, and we need to.
And we have some solutions we want to talk about too. Dr. Barbara, would you go to the chat box? Thanks, Dr. Jordan.
Sure. One of the questions was, and I can personally relate to this, was about the redness and slight itching that has persisted in the injection site after their second dose of Moderna, which was on April 1st. I would, from my personal experience, share with you that I continued to have not so much the redness, but definitely the itchiness for at least 2 weeks after my second dose. I also experienced it after the first dose. But the question is that a reason to be concerned? No, in a way, just as if after you have your second dose, you have some of those annoying side effects, it is your body's doing what you wanted it to do, which is to mount an immune response to the vaccine. So no, you do not need to be concerned about that. Another question that is in the chat is voicing concern about the fact that the AstraZeneca vaccine has had issues in Europe because of clotting episodes. And the question is raised, should we be raising, should Black Health Trust, she says us, I'm assuming she means Black Health Trust, be raising the alarm about that? I would like to make this comment and then open it up to some of our medical advisory members to make comment. And I guess I will throw this to Dr. Davis first, since he is head of our Black Health Trust Vaccine Task Force. Please remember,
Dr. Walks.
please remember that the AstraZeneca vaccine has yet to be approved in the United States. They have yet to put in the application, and therefore we have yet not been able to look at their data. So that's kind of where we are in the United States. Dr. Walks.
So first of all, I'd like to thank Dr. Neighbor Stevens for calling me Ivan Davis. She told me some time ago that that was someone that she really respected. So every time she calls me Dr. Ivan Davis, I feel really good. So let me say this about that. I think the point is that when the vaccine committee of the Black Health Trust went through and initially recommended the vaccines, it was after looking at the information from the drug manufacturers and then looking at the way that that information was presented to the FDA, and then looking at the recommendation from the National Medical Association, and then having the discussion ourselves. So we went through a rigorous process of review before that recommendation came out. And I think, yes, we absolutely should be concerned about what's happening in other parts of the world and what's happening with the AstraZeneca vaccine. We have not had that kind of a concern as we've been vaccinating literally tens of millions of and over 100 million people with the Pfizer vaccine, the Moderna vaccine, and now the J&J vaccine is being used here in America. Those are the three that somebody will try to put in your arm. And I think it's important that when we're telling people it's okay to go get your shot and encouraging folks, see your doctor, get your shot, see your doctor, get your shot, see your doctor, get your shot, that we're talking about the vaccines that are approved here in America for those here in America. That's what we're talking about. Now, I understand the Black Health Trust actually reaches internationally. And there are some folks who may be in places, I think AstraZeneca is being used in Jamaica. If I think Dr. Lisa Kerwin-Dawes is someone who's with us regularly. And if I remember correctly, was talking about AstraZeneca being a vaccine that they use there. I think that those folks have to be concerned, have to stay current with what's going on, with what the recommendations are. For us here in America, we've got Pfizer, we've got Moderna, we've got J&J. Those have gone through a very rigorous process here, and that's what's being used. So I would encourage everyone to look for those leaders in your community, like Dr. Lisa Kerwin-Dawes in Jamaica and other places, to see what's going on locally. Here across the country in America, we haven't, and we hear stories, oh, I know somebody who died after they had the vaccine. Well, not to be flippant about it, but if somebody had the vaccine on Tuesday and fell off a 20-story building on Wednesday, they were not killed by the vaccine. And I think we have to be very careful when we're hearing a lot of these kinds of stories. And there really aren't a lot of these kinds of stories, but nothing to my knowledge, and maybe Dr. Maxey or someone else may know. To my knowledge, I don't know anyone I haven't heard of anyone who has died as a result of taking the vaccine.
As late as 2 hours ago, no documentation of any directly related deaths to the vaccine has been reported or recorded. There's another pediatrician. Is Dr. Walter Faggett on the line?
I didn't see him.
I didn't see.
You did?
No.
Randall,
Okay.
Randall,
Okay. Yes.
to Dr. Jordan. I
Yes,
do
sir.
think we need to be aware, though, as other African nations start getting the vaccine, we should look to see which ones they're getting and how well those vaccines, responded. So I think that's something that Dr. Walks just mentioned about Jamaica. I think we should really be aware of that also, in case they start getting vaccines from China or Russia or Europe.
I think you're right. And as we mentioned at the beginning of the broadcast, there is major concern that the United States and the Western European countries have been using the majority of the vaccines, and there are many underdeveloped countries, so to speak, especially on the continent of Africa, that have not. And this means that there is breeding ground for these variants. I don't know if Dr. Despani is on the line. I'd like him to discuss that. But is Yakini on, Stevens, who is our virtual assistant? I just want you to highlight, if you would, our next several programs.
Happily. So our next scheduled program, well, our next guest speaker will be on 4/18. We have Dr. Bailey coming back for another lecture on domestic violence. And then on April 25th, we have Arnie Joseph's team coming in to discuss cardiovascular disease and complications. On May 2nd, we have Randall Morgan's group coming in to do a presentation on COVID and community implications.
Dr. Randall Morgan represents the Cobb Institute, which is a research institute affiliated with the National Medical Association. And I think he's also with Doris Brown and Winston Price. Go ahead.
On May 9th, we have Arnie Joseph coming back to discuss sickle cell, irritable bowel, and other diseases that impacts the community that are not discussed very often. And then the last thing we have on the schedule thus far is May 23rd. We'll have Dr. Bailey's group coming back again for the third installment on their series on domestic violence.
And I understand we have a pending confirmation on a special speaker on May 2nd.
That's correct. Dr. Collins from the NIH is looking into coming and speaking on the 2nd, as well as now Dr. Gibbons is also hopefully going to be joining him on that date.
So Dr. Francis Collins is the director of NIH, and Dr. Gary Gibbons is also the director of the Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute of NIH. And he's a Black doctor with a $3 billion budget, a major cardiologist, started at Morehouse University. Thank you for that. So we're going to be moving on. We planned just a short program for today. So I know there are other physicians on the line. I see Dr. Ken Steiner, who is a former emergency room physician who has been working on making sure that our communities can get medications without paying an arm and a leg. But Dr. Steiner, I'd love you to comment just on some of the challenges that physicians like you are seeing in emergency rooms across the country.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Maxey, and good to be here today with everyone. I wanted to stay on the long haulers for a bit. You know, you have people that say they don't want to get the vaccine because they don't want to have any side effects from it or what have you, or they don't know the long-term effects. But I can tell you this from speaking with friends of mine and personal experience, treatments to the emergency room and that sort of thing, we see quite a lot of long haulers coming back in. And they're coming in with symptoms that range from physical to severe psychiatric illness. And by way of that, for those listening, I mean suicide attempts, severe depression, the brain fog, which makes people ill at ease and almost not in control of their minds. We haven't looked into this. We need, like any other illness, to have the resources to look into what's happening with these long haulers. What's the difference between someone who ends up being a long hauler and someone who doesn't? You know, is it early treatment? Is it management after treatment? We don't know. Or are they susceptible, you know, in other ways? But I can tell you as a general sense on anecdotal experience, speaking with my friends and personal experience, it seems to exacerbate underlying illnesses, almost like stress does. So if you have coping problems or psychiatric problems that are being treated and then you get COVID, it seems like it exacerbates it. And what I'm seeing though is these people are not getting better. And this is an important issue, not only for us as human beings and as healers and physicians, but also for the government and productivity. How many of those are going to end up on disability? It could be massive. No one's speaking about these things and the cost of these things, not only in a human sense, but in a fiscal sense. So if you love somebody, you'll encourage them to get the vaccine and to practice distance and hand washing and mask wearing and caution, because by any means, I think the messaging here has been pretty clear. This is not over by any means. And all you have to do is walk in a hospital and down a hallway and look in the rooms and see the suffering of COVID people. And I brought up to another group about a week ago that I was asked to speak to about COVID. And I said, the way you die from COVID most often is you suffocate to death. Keep that vision in your mind, and can you face your family and your loved ones and still not encourage vaccination? I think that rings home pretty true to most people. So thank you, Dr. Maxey, for letting me say a few words today and inviting me in. And I want to wish everybody a happy Easter. I hope some of that message rings true.
Dr. Gibbs, go ahead.
Yeah, there's one good thing I can report about COVID. I just saw a study last night in the Journal of the Pediatric Infectious Disease Society, where they're actually seeing less classical Kawasaki syndrome. You know, we had Kawasaki syndrome before COVID came, but they documented a 67% decrease in classical Kawasaki syndrome, which they have surmised to believe now, because we didn't know the cause of it, that it's also has been due to a respiratory virus. But because we've been practicing, you know, wearing the mask and the public health measures, we've actually decreased the classical Kawasaki syndrome, which is distinguished from the COVID Kawasaki syndrome, which actually affects the heart more severely than the regular Kawasaki's.
Well, thank you.
That's a good thing.
Dr. Barbara, are there any questions in the chat?
We have covered the questions that were in the chat.
Okay. We're going to go for just a few more minutes. I just want to make a few announcements. One, Dr. Collins, Dr. Francis Collins, just so you'll know, is the boss of Dr. Fauci. We all know about Dr. Fauci, but he works
Really?
Dr. Francis Collins, who is the director of the National Institutes of Health. So he will be here, and we're going to look for another a number of people that we're going to want to ask a lot of questions. So
Yeah.
have your questions ready on May 2nd. I hope that gets solidified for us. I also want to talk about the biometrics second opinion expert. And I'm encouraging our members of our medical advisory to join that. There are a lot of consultations that people across the country and the world are asking. Please check the blackhealthtrust.org for that website. And we need you on that. If anybody needs any personal explanation, you can call me on that. And we do have, I'm happy to announce did we get our 501c3, Dr. Barbara?
We have been, and Dr. Maxey, actually, Marlon is on.
Marlon?
Yeah.
Is Marlon Jones on, our CPA? Marlon, do you give us our announcement we've been waiting on?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. We did formally receive our 501(c)(3) exemption status on Monday, March 22nd. So we should be receiving our determination letter in a few days.
So very good. So everybody can donate $1 million and help us with our production. That's super great. Are there any members of our medical advisory that I did not recognize to comment on the subjects that we were talking about? I see Dr. Gibson. Is Dr. Gibson able to unmute?
I am. Thank you. There is a comment that I have about, first of all, Dr. Collins. Francis Collins was involved in the Human Genome Project, which was remarkable in and of itself, in that they were able to map the human genome in record time. So his comments should, I'm sure, be very interesting, but that would also be a great time to invite Dr. Kizzmekia Corbett. That's a young Black doctor who, a researcher who was very instrumental in the development of the Moderna vaccine product. So that would be a delightful experience for the Black Health Trust.
We've been
In
blowing
addition
up
to
her
that,
email and phone, so we're waiting on her response.
yeah. In addition to that, as far as the variants are concerned, I know we all miss Dr. Despani, but it is of note that the B117, the UK variant, continues to lead the pack in terms of the mutations. That one, by the way, has a particular characteristic that is of note, that it has some mutation appearances that seem to be, I don't know, asymmetrical and in various parts of unknown origin. And 27, by the way, mutations of B117 occurred all at once. So B117 bears watching, the UK variant, but also so do the others, the P1 out of Brazil and the South African 501Y or 1351, whichever way you like to call it. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Are there any other members of our medical advisory on? Is Dr. Dawes on?
I did not see.
I did see Dr. Dawes on.
Yes, I'm on. I'm listening. I still get mixed up with the time difference.
Hello, Dr. Dawes, chief medical doctor in all of Jamaica, who's also a graduate of Harvard Medical School. And would you care to comment in our last few minutes, Dr. Dawes?
Well, we have not, we are giving out the AstraZeneca vaccine in Jamaica. We have not had any deaths. We've had a few people had bad side effects, but no deaths also from it. We are seeing what they call the long haul syndrome in a lot of, we think a lot of suicides. There's a lot of violence, especially against women now with men home. They've had, I don't know, it's from the lockup or from the virus, but we're having a lot of people, a lot of psychiatric problems, a lot of people going off, chopping up people. It's been quite bad recently.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I have one more question I'm going to ask, the name I see. He happens to be my brother, but he's working with funeral homes in Ohio. And my question is, if you're still available, Jerry Maxey, is the census going up that funeral homes are seeing? What's the status in that industry? Is he unmuted, Simon? Okay. Any other members of our medical advisory on? Well, I'd like to thank Dr. Barbara Neighbors-Stevens and Dr. Ivan Walks and all of our other distinguished colleagues for taking time on this Resurrection Sunday. And we're ready to close down, barring any other significant questions. Is Ms. Brenda Yeager available? If not, I'm going to ask our distinguished Pastor Pointer if he would give us the joy of his benediction. Is the pastor on, Dr. Barbara? Dr. Ivan?
I do not see Reverend Pointer. He was on earlier.
Okay. Well, then I'm going to call on the assistant pastor of my church, Dr. Walks. Would you give us your benediction?
Did you say Dr. Walks?
Yes.
My father was Reverend Walks. Let me make one brief comment, and then I'm happy to close us out. Research was mentioned a couple of times, and Dr. Dennis mentioned research. I see Dr. William Lawson on, who is a champion researcher, and there's a lot of money coming out of the federal government, the CARES Act and other places. And we need to look very carefully at how that money is being spent and make sure it comes into our communities. As block grants go to states and the places where they normally send money, local docs working in their offices can partner with other folks, and we can make sure we get the information we need. So often people have the excuse of being able to say, well, we don't really know what's going on in those communities. So let's pay attention. As these dollars are coming out, let's make sure they're coming to the places where we can gather information. Having said
Dr.
that,
Walks, no, you mentioned Dr. William Lawson. I didn't see his name. I'd love to have him make a comment, and I also see Dr. Rhonda Johnson. I'd like to hear from both of those two individuals if they would care to before we close.
great.
Dr. William
Sure.
Lawson, psychiatrist, professor of medicine at Howard University previously.
I'm just glad you brought up the long haul syndrome. It's a very interesting issue for me because I've had multiple patients who spent time in ventilators. And what's clear is that many of the above phenomena very much, it is back to this post-traumatic stress disorder. Fortunately, they respond to the usual treatments for post-traumatic stress disorder, which is a plus. Also, just note that the O'Connor virus produces syndrome very much like schizophrenia. And we're very concerned and waiting to see if there's going to be an increase in terms of people with severe mental illness who are going to end up hospitalized.
All right, very, very good. And I saw Dr. Rhonda Johnson. Dr. Rhonda Johnson, care to give us a final comment?
A good afternoon, everyone. Happy Resurrection Sunday. I'm always uplifted by the information and the conversation. And this program is the only one that I've ever participated in that offers that mind, body, and spiritual connection. So I really do always appreciate that. I just wanted to encourage us to also branch out into some of the other social media avenues. There is a app, Clubhouse in particular, where millions and millions of people now are gathering. And I happen to listen into some of the rooms where a lot of people are talking about COVID. So I just want to encourage us to be a part of some of these newer social media opportunities, because our voices need to be heard. There's so much misinformation, and a lot of young people and all ages are on Clubhouse now. And I learn a lot. It helps me be informed about where I need to get additional information when I'm talking to community audiences. So that is one point I wanted to make. The second point is I'm hoping that the Black Health Trust can give us some information on the new COVID-19 community course that is being funded by the Biden Health and Human Services Administration. I know Dr. Walks and Dr. Faggett, you guys are in DC and you may be aware of more of these federal initiatives, but where there's money, I mean, these voices that are on this program are doing a lot of community education. So if there's going to be funding opportunities available, I'm hoping that some of that money will flow this way as well, because a lot of the people that participate regularly in this program are doing a lot of community outreach and education. So perhaps someone could find out more about this information and maybe bring it to our awareness in a future segment of the show. But thank you, Dr. Maxey and Dr. Barbara and Dr. Ivan, for all that you do week after week. This is a labor of intensity, I know, on your part, and I just wanted to say thank you.
Let me say, Dr. Maxey, in response to what Dr. Johnson just said, I got an email a couple of weeks ago from the. It's kind of a scary email when you get it. When you get an email from the GAO, the Government Accountability Office, it's always scary. What they wanted to know was they wanted to ask some questions about how I thought, and some other folks thought, the government was spending all of that money that you're talking about, Dr. Johnson. And what I had a chance to talk with them this past week, and I shared with them that what I said a little bit earlier, I really hope that they are paying attention to where the money is actually getting. There's a tendency to do block grants. So the money goes to the state and this state and that state and this state, and they kind of do what they normally do. But to Dr. Johnson's comment, we need to look specifically at opportunities to influence how that money gets spent within our local communities. All public health is local. Everybody says that, but we don't always have the constructs in place to make it look that way when we're talking about funding. So I'm very excited about all the funding that's coming out of the feds, and I'm very excited about some of us being asked those questions by the GAO, and then us being able to have, hopefully, some influence as we go forward.
To that end, we're going to have our special medical advisory meeting this Wednesday. I believe it's set for 5:30 Pacific, and I'm inviting all of the members of that group to be there, including people who are our special advisors, such as Reverend Pointer and John Sedukas, to be with us. And we're also having a steering committee that day. So, but not to keep us much longer, Dr. Barbara will hit me in the head. Dr. Ivan, will you give us your benediction?
So here is my benediction. First of all, don't worry, I am not going to sing. Nobody wants that. What I want to do is pick up on a comment again that Dr. Johnson just made about us being inclusive. She mentioned Clubhouse. On Resurrection Sunday, we talk a lot about how Christ died for us and what that kind of love means in the Christian community. It's really an amazing love. And I want us to be inclusive in our love. I want us to look at the folks who may not celebrate Resurrection Sunday, because those are also our colleagues and those are also our patients. We have a tremendous opportunity to share that love that we celebrate on Resurrection Sunday with everyone that we touch and everyone that we meet. And I would just encourage us to do that, to just go out in love. Our men's scripture at church is 1 Corinthians 16, 13 and 14. Be on your guard, stand firm in the faith, be of good courage, be strong, and do everything in love. And I would like to end with just that. Do everything in love.
Thank you so much. Thank you, and Dr. Barbara Neighbor-Stevens. Thank you, Simon Cooper. Thank you, Yakini Stevens, and also Skylar Maxey and others who have helped us put on this broadcast. We'll be back the same time next week and every week. Thank you so much. Simon?